Hello and welcome to yet another unplanned video. I am very good at these. Anyways, my name is Alex as F1 Stuff for those that don't know, and this is going to be a season that I'm going to call my F1 2020 Fantasy Prediction Season. So in light of the cancellation of the Australian Grand Prix last weekend, I was unable to make my first planned video, which was going to be a reaction of said Grand Prix. Instead, I made two Corona-based videos, which are below par at best, and then also two other Alex's F1 chats rounding up some breaking news stories. I then thought, why not make a review on the race, but fill in the times randomly into my tables. So I went away, randomly popping the times in based off of last year's Grand Prix. However, it really did not work at all. So I scrapped that idea completely. Thinking about it though, I probably should have just popped a little bit in, or one of the made up tables, just to see how completely ludicrous it looked. It just didn't fit. So I wanted a way to make a sort of race outcome based off of last year, but also kind of half believable as well to most people. So that led me to do a lot of maths, like a lot of maths. If you don't like it, just skip to here. I'll pop a time on the screen to when I start the fantasy predictions. But for those that are interested, let's get started in the maths. So the first thing I needed to do was to come up with a way of adjusting each driver's single lap pace in a fair enough way that makes gains or reductions believable, and in doing so I created what I've called my single lap delta, or the SLD for short. So it's a sort of knockoff power rankings algorithm that will give me a value to which I can then adjust the 2019 driver's lap pace off of the session, so the practice and the qualifying sessions, to produce into my new tables. So I took four factors into creating my little algorithm: the improvement from the 2019 to 2020 test times, the tyres used in said test, the time itself, and then also the laps driven. So if we start with the improvement, I calculated the gain or loss each driver made. Loss is indicated by the little plus. Should have moved it slightly closer, doesn't matter, based on the value of the driver who made the most gains. In this case, Verstappen did. So with the benefit of hindsight, probably should have added an extra layer in, which I will try and do to make it for the next year's, but I've already created all the tables, so I can't go and change it for this time, unfortunately, but I will add that in next time. So the percentage of this was then the driver's score for their improvement or their reduction, simply the percentage based off of Verstappen. So next was tyres. Again, I used a similar thing, creating a percentage based on the C5 compound and giving them a score. And I've just realised this is an outdated table. Damn. Anyway, this outdated score was then made by subtracting the percentage from 100, then dividing it by 1,000. The real table that I've used, I've divided it by 100 to give the C4 compound a 2/10 gain, the C5 compound a 4/10 gain, with the C3, I've lost track, the C2 compound a 6/10 gain, in a progressive order like that. The actual 2020 test time was given more or less the same treatment here, but the percentage obviously goes above 100, as a slower time is equal to a larger number. So the score for this was calculated by subtracting 100 from my percent value and then dividing it by 10. And then finally, for the single lap delta, the lap count. And it's very much the same story here, with a percentage being calculated from the most laps driven, which was Hamilton in this case, and then I simply divided the percentage by 1,000. So I know that there are many ways that I will change this in the future that I've picked up after creating this whole table, creating the tables themselves with all the data in. There are definitely different ways that I will change this, but like I said, I can't, as I've already made all the tables, and it would be unfair to change the SLD algorithm to then apply it to the Bahrain Grand Prix, which I will do later on. Anyways, here is the finished SLD table in order, with Verstappen and Russell gaining the most, with Vettel and Albon at the bottom. I couldn't quite squidge it on to the previous slide without making my table a bit too small, so I just put it on a slide on its own. Unfortunately though, this is not over for the maths. There is still another constant that I needed to calculate. So this one I call my race time multiplier, and this is a number used to times up the driver's race time to get a new one. So like the SLD, the RTM uses 3 factors though to create its value, but it's a lot more on the simplistic side, but it definitely does the job. The first step was taking the driver's SLD values and then giving them a rank from 1 to 20. I then divided this number through by 10,000 and added 1. The reason I added 1 was so that when I multiply out their race time, it gets larger rather than smaller, and it was just easier to work out in my head and to keep track of what was going on. Next was to take their qualifying position of the event and divide this number by 100,000, as I felt it didn't play as significant a role in the race as the driver's improvement from the year before. And finally, for the RTM, a random number was assigned to each driver by Excel, and this was divided by 1,000 to give the simulation of racing luck. The lower the random number, the better the driver's race. Then all these values were added up to give the driver's RTM value, which I would then times through their original race time. And there we go, that is the end of the maths. Anyone just joining me from skipping there, I've just created 2 variables, the single lap delta, which is added onto the driver's single lap pace from last year to give the new predicted time, and a race time multiplier to give a new race time when we get there. Also to note, I've switched Albon and Gasly's teams, so Albon is in the AlphaTauri car, as the SLD variable was calculated using the data from his Toro Rosso days, and vice versa for Gasly. Also, I promise we will start soon. Ocon and Latifi were new drivers for 2020 and therefore didn't have any 2019 data, so I've literally just filled them in for the drivers that they took over from last year. And now we can begin. I've got to get some of the assumptions out the way before we can start, as I want to avoid as much confusion as possible. And again, a quick heads up, this is all utter fantasy created with my absolutely rubbish algorithms, so please just go easy. If you spot any mistakes or give me any pointers, please just let me know, but don't go bashing me. It's just complete and utter nonsense what I've created here and spent far too much time making. Anyway, let's move on into practice 1. So practice 1 sees Verstappen fly to the top, 4 tenths clear of Bottas, both gaining 3 places from last year's times. So Perez leaps forward a massive 10 places, but 1.9 seconds off Verstappen, with the biggest losers from last year being Grosjean in the Haas and Albon in the AlphaTauri, both losing 5 places. We'll whiz through practice 2 a bit quick. So this was topped by Bottas, with Perez also gaining 9 places over last year, and Stroll on 5. Vettel is the biggest loser, dropping 7. I'll just let that play out. I was a tiny bit quick. And the final practice session before we jump to qualifying sees Hamilton claim top spot like he did last year, with Verstappen coming forward 7 places to be 300ths off. Ricciardo comes forward 5 for Renault, and Perez again leaping forward 7 places over last year. Unfortunately, both Williams are still at the bottom, but Russell is only 1/10 away from Norris. And as we move on into qualifying, Sergio Perez has made the most significant place gains throughout practice with 26 places, and Vettel is the biggest loser, losing out 13. As we move into Q1, it runs much the same as the practice sessions here, with Bottas leading from Verstappen, who's 2 tenths clear from Leclerc's Ferrari. Perez continues his strong form in 4th ahead of Hamilton and Ricciardo. Ocon makes it into the top 10 for Q1 in front of Kvyat and Magnussen's Haas. Stroll in the sister Racing Point can't quite match his teammate's pace just yet, 6 tenths behind him. Dropping back to 15th, Gasly just makes it into Q2 by 700ths ahead of Norris in the McLaren. Albon is out too, along with Vettel in the Ferrari, who has the 2 Williams for company on the back row. As we roll on into Q2, it's the same top 3 again that we've seen all before. Bottas ahead of Verstappen, then Hamilton. Perez and Leclerc are separated by less than a tenth for P4, with Grosjean in 6th behind. Ricciardo is the first of the Renaults, with Magnussen and Raikkonen sandwiching him and his teammate Ocon, who just squeezes into Q3 in 10th. Giovinazzi is first knocked out in P11 with Kvyat behind him. Stroll finished 1.2 seconds off his teammate. He's definitely got a lot of work to do in the race. Sainz in the McLaren is next, and Gasly in the Red Bull, failing to get through into the final part of qualifying. And so we have the final part of qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix. Bottas takes pole, 3/10 clear from Verstappen, and then 6/10 clear of Hamilton in P3. Leclerc's Ferrari can't quite match the pace of them as he joins Hamilton on the second row. Grosjean is best of the rest in 5th, with Ricciardo putting in a mega lap for 6th to get in front of the rapid racing point of Sergio Perez. Magnussen and Raikkonen are next, with Ocon rounding off the top 10 on his return to Formula 1. So as we take a look at the starting grid for the Australian Grand Prix, Bottas and Verstappen move forward from 2019, with Hamilton dropping 2 places. Leclerc comes forward 1, as does Grosjean. Both Ricciardo and Perez make big gains, 6 and 3 places respectively. Magnussen moves back 1, with Raikkonen staying put in 9th. Giovinazzi, Kvyat and Stroll all move forward 3 places, with Sainz and the McLaren coming forward 4 from last year. Norris, Albon and Vettel all go back significantly. Norris falls 8, Albon 4, and Vettel a massive 15 places dropped as he failed to get through to Q2. And we move on to the race. And another assumption here is made, as I couldn't find each driver's full race time, so I've had to take the lapped driver's fastest lap in 2019, apply my SLD value to the fastest lap, and then add that on once, twice or 3 times, depending on how many times they were lapped in the race, to the leader's lap time. Not only will this bunch up the field a bit, it also means that any retirements after lap 1 that occurred in 2019 will be nullified. So for those drivers that retired on lap 1, they will unfortunately have to stay retired, as I could not accurately determine a new race time. And then the lapped drivers are determined by taking the race leader's SLD fastest lap, adding that to his race time, and then any driver slower than that are 1 lap down. This time will then be added on again to find drivers 2 laps down, and so forth. This allows me to display the race times and the intervals for drivers that were lapped by the leader. And finally, before we begin with the race, a random number generator picks between 1 to 5 drivers who will retire, and then based on that number they will then pick the corresponding drivers who do retire, as you will find out in the race. So let's get started. Here we go. Bottas takes a comfortable victory again in Australia, 21 seconds clear from Verstappen, who moves forward 1 place from last year. Leclerc makes the podium in this year round, in 3rd, but a long way off the top 2. Stroll had an incredible race from 13th to 4th, gaining 5 places on his 2019 finishing position. Magnussen and Norris are next, the latter having a very good race from 16th to 6th, but Hamilton though had a shocker down in P7, 3 seconds clear of Grosjean and Ricciardo in the Renault. Kvyat rounds off the top 10, scoring the last point for AlphaTauri. Vettel just misses out on some points, coming forward from 18th to 11th, but still 7 places down on his 2019 place. Perez had a bad race though, after looking so strong through practice and qualifying. He couldn't match his teammate in P4. Ocon, Albon and Raikkonen all lose places from last year's race and also from qualifying as well. Then comes the 2 Williams still at the bottom, but a lot closer in Russell's case, as he was 21 seconds back from Raikkonen. And just a little bit more left to go. We have the fastest lap, as that goes to Bottas, so he claims the extra point as he finishes ahead of Verstappen and Hamilton. As we move into a quick look at the championship after round 1. So for the drivers, Bottas is 8 points clear from the Red Bull of Verstappen, who has 17 points covering the 8 drivers that are behind him. And then in the Constructors, Mercedes take the lead, 14 points clear from Red Bull, who have Ferrari, Haas and Racing Point all very close behind, with McLaren, Renault and AlphaTauri scoring points too, with Williams and Alfa Romeo yet to score. And there we go. That rounds off my fantasy prediction video. Hope you all enjoyed. I'll make another one of these for Bahrain and release it ahead of the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend. Sorry this one is a bit late. It was very spontaneous, and then we had the whole coronavirus issue, and well, we've always had that, but I was being moved around. I haven't always been at my computer lately, and I've only just had the time to record it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.